Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be an in-depth deep dive on the Menendez brothers. I'm sure you guys have heard of this case. It is quite famous, and it has honestly really been going around lately because of the new Netflix show, which is essentially a Ryan Murphy production, which a lot of people have beef with, which we'll talk about as we go on. But I want to say, honestly, like, despite whether or not, like, you think it's morally right for Ryan Murphy to have made this show, that is by far some of the best acting I have ever seen in my life. The actual Menendez brothers did not appreciate this documentary, but we're going to talk about that and kind of go into detail just about the case itself. This case has a lot of sensitive topics, so I'm just letting you guys know that now, but I'm sure that you've heard about it before. All right, so we're going to start with the background of the Menendez family. So Jose Menendez was born on May 6th of 1944 in Havana, Cuba. And when he was 16 years old, his family relocated to the United States. Jose enrolled at the Southern Illinois University, where he studied accounting. This is where he met a woman named Mary Louise Anderson, also known as Kitty. So Kitty was born on October 14th of 1941, and she was raised in Oak Lawn, Illinois. Kitty was a pageant girl. She was very beautiful and very charming, and she wanted to be a Hollywood star. But ultimately, she was studying at Southern Illinois University to become a teacher. Jose had come from a wealthy family, but he also created his own wealth in America, and he just absolutely charmed Kitty. She always wanted to marry well and be a mother, so that is exactly what she decided to do when she met Jose. After Jose and Kitty were married, Jose continued to climb up the corporate ladder, and he ended up becoming very rich. They had children. Jose Lyle Menendez, who is better known as Lyle, was born in 1968, and 2 years later, their second son, Eric Menendez, was born. By the time the boys were born, Jose Menendez had secured a very lucrative position as an executive in the entertainment industry, working for companies like Live Entertainment. This is when the Menendezes decided to move to Beverly Hills, California. Now, the house that they lived in was a very famous, extravagant mansion. It was owned by Elton John, Michael Jackson. You can literally drive by this house. I actually did the other day after watching all of the documentaries on this. And yeah, it's pretty creepy and interesting that so much has happened there. But anyway, so in the early 1980s, they moved there. But this house was actually a temporary home for them. They were building a house in Calabasas that would have been much bigger and better, I guess. It was like Kitty's dream home, but they obviously never ended up moving in. The Menendez family really wanted to maintain the image of the perfect American dream type of family. They were doing well for themselves, they made a lot of money, and their kids were well educated, well dressed, and basically were prepared to follow in the footsteps of their father's success. The family really lived a life of luxury. Lyle and Eric attended private schools, they drove luxury vehicles, and they just really were always brought up with money. But this image of the perfect family came crashing down on August 20th of 1989. When Jose and Kitty were brutally murdered by their two sons, Eric and Lyle Menendez. So there is a lot of question regarding the why of this case, because for a while, Lyle and Eric Menendez were maintaining their innocence. They said they didn't do this. They actually had proposed the idea, and it was widely believed that this was a mafia hit. But after their parents' death, Eric and Lyle kind of started spending a lot of money lavishly. It just looked a little strange how much they were spending their parents' money rather than grieving. It led a lot of people to ask some questions, but ultimately they were found out because Eric actually confessed to the murder of his parents to his therapist, which we're gonna talk about later. We're kind of gonna go back in time and then to the night of the murders and so on and so forth, and then the trial and everything. I'm gonna try to stay chronologically, but a lot of things just like come from different places. But we're gonna talk chronologically about what allegedly happened in the Menendez house prior to Kitty and Jose's death. So once the boys had been accused of murdering their parents, and once they had admitted to it, they became very open and honest about the abuse that they had experienced in their home by the hands of their father and their mother a bit as well, but also their mother knowing about the abuse from the father and not doing anything about it. We're gonna get into their testimonies, but essentially from when Lyle was 6 to 8 years old, he claims that his father SA'd him, and he thought that it had stopped when he was 8 years old, but then his brother Eric confided in him a couple of weeks before the murder that he was actually still abusing Eric to that day. So Eric was 18 at the time of the murder, and he claimed to Lyle that he was being assaulted by his father. And allegedly that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but we're gonna kind of go back and forth through their testimonies and what they had to say. But ultimately, the abuse that was going on in the household is what they claimed was the driving force behind their decision to kill their parents. But that doesn't really come into play until later. Kind of a lot was going on in 1989 in general in the Menendez family. Jose had been cheating on Kitty, which led her to become dependent on alcohol and drugs, and it just seemed like overall there was a lot of cracks in this perfect family. But now we're gonna go into the actual murders, like what had happened, and then we'll talk about the trials after and all of the theories and thoughts. So on the night of August 20th of 1989, the Menendez family were at their Beverly Hills mansion enjoying what seemed like a typical evening. Jose and Kitty were laying on the couch in the den watching TV, but Lyle and Eric came in with shotguns that they had purchased in San Diego, which we're gonna also talk about that in a minute. They used fake IDs to buy the guns. So that all kind of corroborates the idea that this murder was premeditated. But nonetheless, at around 10 p.m., Lyle and Eric entered the family room with the guns they had purchased and shot and killed their parents. They shot their parents at point blank range, which a lot of people, you know, talk about later in the testimony about how there must have been some severe anger behind this, because to shoot someone that close and like it be your parent is kind of crazy and pretty unheard of. In total, the brothers fired 15 rounds into their parents. After the murders, this was when Lyle and Eric kind of began to stage the crime scene. I don't know what they thought exactly was going to happen at first, which is why I kind of agree that the idea of the murders being really premeditated is kind of confusing, because I don't think that they thought they would get away with it, because shooting someone in a Beverly Hills residential neighborhood 15 times, like surely the cops would have been called, but they weren't. That has never made sense to me in regards to this. How is there 15 rounds of firing shotguns that nobody called the police about? Like, this is an upscale, very residential area in Beverly Hills. You would absolutely hear the gun, and I don't understand why they weren't called. So I don't know if Lyle and Eric like thought that the police were just gonna be called on them, and then they were just gonna be like, it was self-defense, this is what's been happening. But I think that they waited around a bit for the police to come, and then they realized that nobody had called in the sound of their shotguns. So therefore, that's when they decided to stage this murder and make it seem like they didn't do it, at least according to them. So they began to kind of clean up the crime scene. They removed all of the shell casings from the bullets, attempted to clean up some of the blood. They also drove up Coldwater Canyon Boulevard, which is crazy. I drive on that road all the time. And this is where they discarded their bloody clothes and their shotguns they threw it over like the canyon, I think. And at that point, they also put on different clothes. They put on their tennis clothes that were already in the car. So again, that was not premeditated. Like, they hadn't packed clothes and like planned it. They were just like, their workout clothes were in the car. So at this point, the intention was to make the murders look like an execution based on Jose's business dealings tied to the mafia somehow. So the boys knew that they had to come up with an alibi. So they went to go purchase tickets to the movie Batman, but the tickets that they had purchased would have set them theoretically at the movie theater during the murders. And their plan was to return home from the movie and pretend to discover the bodies of their parents. And that's what they did. They got home, and at 11:47 p.m., Lyle made a very frantic 911 call, screaming and crying hysterically, saying that somebody had killed his parents.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man,
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response, 722 North Elmore.
What happened? Hey, stay there,
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get clean further. Other
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? I don't hear anything. I just came home. You came home and found who shot? Mom and Dad.
You know what? They're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him. Okay, hang on. Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad. Your mom and dad? My mom and my dad. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance. Okay, I gotta go.
And it's pretty damning evidence now that we know that it was them who did it. I think the reason that this 911 call is important is because it is kind of the only thing that gives me pause, because I think these boys' testimonies are very, very, very realistic in my opinion, but also this 911 call was also realistic, but we know that it's not real. We know that they weren't discovering the bodies for the first time. We know that they killed them. Making a 911 call that's like very dramatic maybe is easier than lying and like crying on the stand, but we'll talk about that later. But initially, the emotional intensity of the call really did make the police believe that the boys were not involved. When the police officers arrived at the scene, this was a very gruesome murder, to the point where a lot of the police officers who see this stuff every day and are used to seeing dead bodies like had to leave the room because it was so gruesome. Like, these people, like Kitty and Jose, were very brutally murdered, like obliterated. And like I said, the initial investigation focused on the possibility that this was a mob-related hit based on Jose's high-profile position in the entertainment industry. So at first, no one really assumed anything of Lyle and Eric. They seemed like grieving sons, but then in the months following the murders, they kind of got a little weird. So Lyle and Eric inherited a portion of their parents' $14 million estate, and with their newfound wealth, the boys began to live very lavish lifestyles. But they started spending a ridiculous amount of money. Lyle bought a Porsche, a Rolex, and invested in a restaurant at Princeton, New Jersey. Eric started paying more tennis lessons and wanted to become just like a pro tennis player, honestly. But their sudden and extravagant lifestyle started to raise a lot of suspicion from friends and family. But the tipping point of this entire case was in late 1989 when Eric, who had been overcome with guilt, confided in his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, that he and Lyle had murdered his parents. So Dr. Oziel was not like a random therapist. This is somebody that the boys and Kitty and Jose had been seeing for quite some time. And once their parents died, Dr. Oziel ended up reaching out to Eric again to like give his condolences. And then in late 1989, that is when Eric just broke down and confessed the entire thing to Dr. Oziel. Dr. Oziel was recording these sessions, and that will later become very key evidence in the prosecution's case. So Dr. Oziel was married, but he had a mistress named Judalon Smith, and this woman is the entire reason that this case was found out, pretty much, because she learned about the confession, and out of her own fear and for her own safety, or some people think that it's because Dr. Oziel was not leaving his wife, she decided to report this to the police that they had confessed on March 8th of 1990, and she told them that there were tapes of them talking about the murders. Lyle and Eric were arrested and charged with the murder of their parents, and this was when the investigation started to unfold. And honestly, these tapes became such a huge part of the prosecution, but a lot of people were debating whether or not that was like really fair, because obviously there's HIPAA laws when it comes to doctors, but ultimately it ended up incriminating them. So that's what happened. Let's talk about the prosecution's case. A lot of people believed that Eric and Lyle killed their parents for money, that they wanted their inheritance, so they killed their parents. That is the second most common, I would say, theory when it comes to this case, is that they did it for money. I think a lot of people started to believe this theory because the boys kind of corroborated it themselves, spending over $1 million in 6 months after their parents' death. So like, obviously that's gonna look suspicious, guys. Also, it was later known that apparently Jose had planned to take his children off of his will. And so it's believed that a potential motive to kill them when they did, because they didn't want to be written out of Jose's will, and then their parents die naturally, and then they have nothing. So that's another, I guess, important aspect of this case, because Jose had told Lyle and Eric that he was taking them out of the will. But nonetheless, another significant element to the prosecution was that the case had a bit of a calculated nature. Obviously, the two boys had purchased 12-gauge shotguns from Big Five Sporting Goods store in San Diego just days before the murders. San Diego is quite far from Los Angeles. That is quite a hike. It's essentially because they didn't want this gun to be tracked down. And they claim that they bought the guns to use as self-defense because they believed that their father and their mother wanted to kill them. But I just think it's interesting. Obviously, they used fake IDs and they took the precautions to stage the crime to make it look like a professional hit, which would indicate that there was some premeditation. Also in Dr. Oziel's tapes, it's very critical because Eric's confession admits that they had planned and executed the murders. Like, they were planning on doing this. And it wasn't just like a crime of passion where it just happened like after a big argument. I also think that the defense was able to use the 911 call being so believable against the Menendez brothers because, therefore, if you are that good at lying, because we knew they were lying at that point, what else are you lying about? And that is the only thing that makes me be like, well, I mean, I guess they could be lying, even though I do believe that there was 100% abuse in that household. There was definitely, like, I don't think that you just go murder your parents in such a gruesome way unless they did something so unspeakable to you. But again, we'll talk about it. So while the prosecution painted Lyle and Eric as very greedy young men, cold-blooded killers, the defense constructed a very different narrative and portrayed Lyle and Eric as like boys, as innocent boys who were just 18 and 22 years old. Like, they're men at that point, they're grown up, but they're still kids. The main part of their argument was that the brothers had experienced SA from their parents, and that is why they killed them. So the defense did not argue that Eric and Lyle didn't kill their parents, but instead of being driven by greed, they were driven by an act of self-defense born out of a lifetime of terror and abuse. I think both Eric and Lyle's testimonies about the abuse that they experienced in their household is pretty convincing in my opinion. Like, I believe that that happened. Yes, the 911 call is like kind of sus because that just shows that they could really put on the act if they needed to. But at the same time, they did just kill their parents. Like, they were going through something traumatic and like a crazy experience regardless. So like, I don't think it's really that hard to muster up those kind of emotions, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. And also I think like pretending to be distraught over the phone is very different than sitting on the stand in front of a jury of people who are deciding your life. I don't know. So the boys' testimony of abuse in their household definitely got the heart of the jurors, especially the female jurors, because at this time, it's 1989. I think still to this day, people don't take men being abused as seriously as they should. But at that time, it was very taboo because like men just didn't get abused like that. Why would a man do that? So I do think that that is a big part of this case as well.
After sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom, like 2 or 3 times a week. We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements. He used objects.
What kind of objects?
A toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions. He'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me. She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Did you tell your brother? Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also, and I played with Eric in the same way. And I'm sorry.
When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Eric.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Eric, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Eric alone.
Lyle and Eric both claimed that their mother, Kitty Menendez, was aware of the abuse happening and a passive enabler to her husband abusing their children, and that is why they had to kill her as well, they said. But the defense argued that Kitty being complicit in the abuse, and combined with the fact that she was very emotionally unstable, and this created a very toxic environment in which the brothers truly felt like they had no escape. Lyle had also spoken about how when he was a young boy, like teenager as well, his mother would she just was weird with them, I guess. She would just be walking around naked and be like, how does my body look? Like just weird shit, basically.
Would she ask you how she looked?
Yes.
And sometimes when she asked you how she looked, would she be inappropriately attired?
She would be topless. Usually just topless or like an open robe. And sometimes, with her clothes on.
And what ages are you talking about where she would expose herself to you this way?
It's like I was about 11.
She help you with your baths?
Yes.
How would she help you with your baths?
She would come in after I'd been in there a while. She would help wash my hair and wash me with a sponge.
How old are you talking about?
Same, 11 to 11 to 13.
And when you say she would wash you with the sponge, would she just wash your back, or?
No. She would wash me everywhere.
She would wash your genitals?
Yes.
You slept in bed with your mom a lot, didn't you, even when you were little?
Yes.
And did you continue to sleep in her bed around this time when you're 11 and 12?
Sometimes.
And sometimes, did you touch your mom?
Yes.
Would your dad be in bed?
Sometimes.
And where would you touch her?
Everywhere.
Did she touch your back?
She kissed me, but she didn't touch me.
And how long did these things go on for?
Until I was 13, a little bit farther than that.
And when this was going on with your mom, was she nicer to you than she used to be?
No. She was worse.
And did it stop at some point?
It stopped a few months after I was 13.
Who stopped it?
I did.
How did she react to that?
She was furious. She harassed me.
What do you mean she harassed you?
She just kept exposing herself, picking me up at the clubs with, in a robe, exposed, leaving her underwear around, calling me into the room when she knew that she was, changing, asking me if she looked pretty, and called me a liar when I said yes. Sometimes she would be in a tantrum, and then she would come over and she would touch my face real gentle, like she was going to kiss me, and then she would go back into a rage. And she was very upset.
What was it that your mother started to do?
She would ask me to sit on the bed and take down my pants so she could examine me.
Examine you where?
And my genitals. She called it checking me out. She would say, "Let me check you out." And I would sit down on the bed and she would look at my penis.
Would she, did she tell you why she was checking you out?
She just said to see if there was anything wrong. She didn't give me any details about why.
So it seemed like both parents were contributing to this abuse. So the defense claimed that the catalyst for the murders was that Jose himself had made specific threats to harm the brothers if they ever were to come forward about the abuse. It's kind of like a series of events that occurred. So Eric and Lyle were close brothers, but Eric was living at home while Lyle was living at Princeton. And his mother, in a rage, ripped off Lyle's wig. He wears a toupee, which he's been bald since he was 14 years old, which is also concerning. And a lot of people think points to stress, but that's up for debate, I guess. But either way, his own brother, Eric had no clue that Lyle had no hair or was wearing a hairpiece at all. So this secret really shocked him, and this was a couple weeks before their death. So Eric decided to confide in Lyle and tell him that he was being still abused to this day by Jose. And that was when Lyle decided to confront Jose, which again is where allegedly Jose threatened their lives if they were to tell anyone.
You telling Lyle what? Was it you telling Lyle about something that was happening?
My dad. My dad.
If you don't ask.
My dad had been molesting me.
And did you want something from your brother? Is that why you told him?
I wanted it to stop.
Were you seeking help from your brother?
Yes. I told him that it was basically oral sex that was happening.
Okay. And did you tell him anything about any kind of violence that would accompany it or any kind of threats from your father?
Yes.
And what did you tell him about violence?
I told him that there were pins and tacks that Dad would stick in me and use.
Pins.
Could you speak up, please?
That Dad would stick in me and use.
Pins and tacks?
Yes.
And did you give him the impression that these pins and tacks were being used during oral sex?
Yes.
And in fact, was that something that did happen between yourself and your father when you were a teen?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you tell him about any weapons that your father ever threatened you with?
I told him that he threatened me with a knife.
Now, Mr. Menendez, do you remember the kind of knife that your father threatened you with?
Yes.
What kind was it?
It was a jagged knife.
A what?
A a jagged knife on one end. It was a Rambo knife.
A Rambo knife?
Yeah, a knife that he had.
You just learned that your brother had basically threatened to tell on your father.
Yes.
If the two of you disappeared that night, did you have in mind anything that your father might think about that?
Well, I thought Dad was going to kill us, and no matter where we went, anywhere, he was going to kill us. Obviously, my dad thought that Lyle and I were going to go tell somebody.
So if you left the house that night, what do you think your dad would have thought?
That we were going to tell.
That you had gone to tell?
I don't know if we had gone to tell that instant, but that we were definitely going to tell.
So where did the conversation with your brother Lyle lead to Thursday night?
It led to us having to buy guns. Led to Lyle saying, we got to protect ourselves. We got to do something. Because I kept eliminating all of his options.
Okay, he was coming up with options.
Yeah, I was pretty much just crying and doing whatever I was doing. He was saying, well, what if we could do this? Well, what if we do that? And he said, calm down, we'll work it out. And I was just not being very helpful.
Did you think any of the options would work?
No.
So a decision was made to try to protect yourselves yourself. Is
Yes.
that it? And you were talking about the fact that Dad would kill you. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you think your mother would stop him?
Oh, I thought my mom would do it with him. There wasn't no one and the other.
Why did you think your mother would do it with him?
Because that's who my mom was. They were very much of a team. Besides the fact that my mom hated us, they were a team.
Were you so sure that your mother hated you before Thursday night as you were after?
After, I definitely knew. I mean, for her to have known all those years, I knew she must have hated me, but I thought it before as well.
And did he come in physical contact with you?
Yeah, he grabbed me as I was trying to get over the desk.
You were trying to climb over the desk?
Yeah, I was trying to jump over the desk because I just wanted to get away from him at that point.
And he somehow stopped you from jumping over the desk and did what?
Well, he grabbed me and threw me on the bed.
Okay. And then did he try to do something to you while on the bed?
Yeah, he was grabbing toward me, and I was able to just fling my body away and run out the door.
So you got away from him?
Yeah.
And where did you run to?
Downstairs.
And did you go into a particular room downstairs after you got down the stairs?
Yeah, I just ran into the den.
Did you think there was anybody in the den?
Yeah, I thought there might be somebody in the den. The television was on.
And was there, in fact, anybody in the den?
Yes.
Who?
My mom.
What was your mother doing in the den?
She was sitting on the couch watching TV. She just looked over at me.
And what condition were you in when you got into the den? Do you know?
I was crying.
And did she say anything to you? Did she make any comment to you?
Yeah, she said, "What's the matter with you?"
And what did you respond to her when she said that?
Yeah, I said, "No, nothing. You won't understand."
You said...
I said, "No, nothing. You won't understand."
And did she say anything to that?
Yeah, she said something like, oh, I understand. I understand a lot more than you think.
And what did you say when you heard... Well, first of all, what did you think when you heard that?
I couldn't... I thought that she was saying that she knew what was happening between Dad and I, but I couldn't... I thought I had it wrong. And so I said, what do you mean? What do you mean you understand? What do you understand? And I couldn't understand.
And what did she say?
Well, she said, "Oh, I know. I've always known. You think I'm stupid?" She was real snide. I think she was either... I think she had been drinking and was real...
Sarcastic?
Yeah.
So the defense also called upon an expert witness to testify about the psychological impact of long-term abuse, and these experts, including psychologists and trauma specialists, testified that the brothers had exhibited signs of PTSD and other psychological effects commonly associated with victims of severe abuse. They argued that the brothers' actions on the night of the murders were the result of years of trauma and fear, and that their judgment had been impaired by the psychological toll that the abuse had taken on them. Also, according to these psychologists, they said that the lavish spending after the murders could be their way to cope with these overwhelming emotions that they were experiencing. So this first trial happened in July of 1993, and in January of 1994, the trial ended up ending as a mistrial because the jury couldn't decide. They couldn't come to a unanimous decision whether or not the boys were guilty of first-degree murder or manslaughter, which are very different sentences. A lot of people believed the boys that they were actually abused, but then they also couldn't ignore the fact that there was premeditation in the murders and also the possibility of financial gain. So it was a little wishy-washy, but in 1995, the second trial of the Menendez brothers occurred, and there was a pretty big significant shift in this trial. Like, this trial was very different from the first one. In the second trial, Judge Stanley Weisberg significantly limited the defense. In the first trial, the boys were able to give a very emotional testimony about the abuse that they had endured, but the second trial focused more narrowly on the killings themselves, and the second trial basically excluded most of the details about the abuse. I think that that is a huge part of this case regardless, is that these kids were abused. But the judge ruled that the allegations of abuse were not directly relevant to whether or not the brothers premeditated the murders, which completely disagree. And I think that's a flaw in the judicial system because that's insane. Like, obviously, that, like, they should know everything. I think the jury should be aware of everything. And the fact that they weren't getting those emotional testimonies from the boys talking about the trauma and experience and abuse that they had endured is crazy to me that that's even considered a fair trial. So without the emotional weight of the abuse narrative, the prosecutor's argument that the murders had occurred because they wanted to inherit their parents' money became way more popular in the eyes of the media. This also made it way more difficult for the defense to evoke sympathy within the jury because they had no testimony. This terrible abuse that was going on behind closed doors. So it really wasn't painting Kitty and Jose in the light that they should have been painted in my opinion. In March of 1996, both Lyle and Eric were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Menendez boys have remained in prison since then. They were actually separated until 2018, which is pretty crazy. Now they are in the same prison, and I don't know, I just think it's like pretty ruthless that they separated the boys. Because to me, this case is pretty clear. Allegedly, at least this is my opinion on it, is that I think that Jose and Kitty were like horrendous parents. Like, again, the defense ended up corroborating a lot of the claims that the boys had been abused. There were pictures of the boys taken when they were literal children of their genitals that their dad took. And meanwhile, the prosecution tried to argue that the boys took those pictures themselves, which is just insane.
He would take photographs of us, our private parts.
And would he have you come in and pose for these photographs, or how would that happen?
I would just, if we were in the showers or bathtub or changing, he would just use the same camera that my mother used, and then he would come in and take just a photograph or two, and he wouldn't say anything, and then he would leave.
The prosecution's theory is that the boys, the children, took the naked pictures.
But also there was family members who corroborated the fact that Jose was kind of an abusive father in general, and that he had showered with the boys, and after their showers he would go into their rooms and lock the doors behind them, and the family members weren't allowed to know what was going on.
Mr. Anderson, during the period of time that you were at these houses, you never saw any sexual abuse, did you?
We were not allowed in the room.
You saw no sexual abuse, is that correct?
If you don't want to consider the showers that they took together after they were playing tennis, I found kind of strange.
But ultimately, I think it's pretty clear that Jose and Kitty were abusive towards their children. And do I think that money was perhaps a factor in this case? Yeah. Like, I think two things can be true at once. I think the Menendez brothers were used to their lifestyle. They knew that they could theoretically maybe get away with, like, running away, changing their names, and escaping their family in that sense. It's because obviously they're 18 and 20 years old at the time of the murders. They could have left. I think they're used to the lifestyle that they were living. They're two little rich kids who had no idea what to do in this scenario. And did they make the wrong decision? Of course. Like, obviously that's never the answer to what you should do. But either way, I think that they were perhaps influenced by money, I would say, rather than driven by money. I think they were driven by genuine fear of their lives. I think they were scared that their dad would kill them, would try to find them, track them down, all this stuff. I believe that. But I also think that they were influenced by money, and that's why they went about the murders the way that they did. I don't think they did it for money or for their inheritance, but I think that that influenced their decisions within killing their parents, you know? So now let's fast forward to today. I personally kind of think they're gonna get out of prison. I know that they were sentenced to that, life without parole, but there has been some new evidence that has come forward, like a letter that Eric had wrote his cousin Andy about his father abusing him has been found, and that was sent to Andy months before the murder, where he wrote, "It's still happening, Andy. It's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking." And Andy claims that Eric had confided in him that his dad was abusing him.
Did Eric begin a conversation with you?
Yes.
And do you recall how the conversation began?
Well, yes, I do.
Okay, would you tell us how it began?
He asked me if my dad ever gave me massages.
And did you understand at that point what he meant?
No, I didn't.
And do you recall basically what your response to him was?
Well, at that point, I got the feeling, I'm sure he let me know this, but he was actually trying to find out if any of these massages were normal. And my response to him was that I wouldn't know. I didn't have a father around. My parents were divorced then. And I really couldn't help him.
Let me ask you this. He asked you whether your father gave you massages.
That's right.
Did you said he was trying to find out if it was normal. Was there something else he told you about the massages? Like where they were?
Yes, he did.
Okay. What did he say about where the massages were?
Well, he told me his father was massaging his dick.
He used that word?
Yes, he did. Well, what I do remember very specifically was him asking me to make a promise to him never to reveal that to anybody. And he was saying it very seriously, and I took it very seriously.
Had you suggested at any point in the conversation revealing it to someone or telling someone or asking someone about it?
Well, at that point, I was wondering myself, and I really wanted to ask my mother if that was normal.
Did you mention that to Eric?
Yes, I did.
And was it after that that he made you promise?
I don't remember. It was probably after that, yes.
So you told him, I don't know if it's normal, why don't I ask my mom? Something like that?
Exactly.
And what did he say to you when you suggested asking your mother?
He told me never to reveal it to anybody, to promise him that I would keep it a secret between us.
So I don't know, I think that piece of evidence is quite important, and I think it's really raising the question here, which is, do they deserve life in prison for this? And I would have to say I don't think so. I think they definitely deserved to serve time, but there are plenty of people who kill people and don't go to jail for life. The fact that they were even up for the death penalty is crazy to me, because I think, to me, these kids were clearly abused. And that's really sad, and I can't imagine what you would do in that scenario. Obviously most people don't kill their parents that are abused by them. That's just a fact, but obviously there are some extenuating circumstances, and after hearing their testimonies, I don't think that they should be in life in prison, because I don't think that they're going to kill more people, which is essentially like the reasoning for keeping them in jail. And I don't know, I think that they maybe deserve another chance at a trial, but I would like to hear your guys' opinions on this. Having more young people hear this story and being like, all right, we need to like do something about this. And even Kim Kardashian met with them, and she's famously known for trying to get people off of death row and out of life in prison. So honestly, who knows what'll happen next? Let me know your guys' thoughts and what you think should happen. I would love to hear. But that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this case. That is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and subscribe for new videos every week, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.